Welcome back to Overlord Alex Gaming. In today's video, I'm going to be going over what I consider to be the best early to mid-game build for clearing content and progressing through the Haga Basin in Dune Awakening. The goal of this build is to give you a balanced setup of strong combat, plenty of utility, and enough gathering skills to make your progression much smoother. For this guide, I'm going to assume you've unlocked at least level 1 in each of the 5 skill trees. If you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll know that by starting as the Bene Gesserit class, you can unlock all 5 skill trees by the time you reach Tier 3, or the Steel Technology tier, making this build available much earlier than many players realize. If you haven't unlocked all 5 skill trees yet, or if you're further along in the game as far as the class quest lines go, don't worry. I'll also be covering a few different variations of this build depending on where you are in your progression. One final thing before we jump in though. This build is designed around using both ranged weapons and melee combat. I think that's the most effective way to progress through the early and the mid game. However, if you're completely committed to playing only ranged or only melee, you can easily move some of these points into either the appropriate weapon damage passives or some of the appropriate techniques to better fit your preferred playstyle, which I will be going over a little bit in detail while I cover these. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into the builds. Alright, starting off, let's go over a 30-point build you can use, assuming you have unlocked all 5 of the class trees. Now, I'm going to be showing a couple caveats, and I'm also going to be explaining, if you don't have a certain tree unlocked, where to put those points. But starting off, let's look at the Trooper tree. So, first off, the essential technique you want to get, and this is going to be for most builds unless you're a marksman build, and using rifles or pistols or something exclusively for headshots, you have to use center of mass. So that's going to be on our technique bar over here. It's one of the essential techniques we're going to use throughout the rest of the game. And I use it in a lot of the other builds that I show in my other videos for the mid game as well as the end game. So another useful technique we're going to put on our bar is going to be Suspensor Dash. So get a point into Suspensor Dash, and we're also going to have the ability Shiga Wire Claw. As far as the other stuff for this tree, you can put a point into Suspensor Efficiency. It's kind of helpful, but it's not required. So it's very much optional if you want to save your points for more damage boosting stuff. Moving on, let's look at the Mentat tree. So, like I said before, if you are a marksman build, you're going to want to put a point into marksman instead of center of mass, because you're going to be focusing on headshots only, and put a point into your respective weapon passive, such as pistol or rifle damage. So, if you're a big fan of the turret, obviously you can have that unlocked as well if you have marksman, so it can be a nice little support tool in the early game as well. So, but as I said before, if you're a marksman, put a point into headshot damage for that extra little bit of headshot damage. But otherwise, we're not really going to touch this tree for the regular build. This focuses on using center of mass. So, moving on to the planetologist tree, we have a point into cutter rate mining. This is going to impact our buggy, if you have a buggy, or also our handheld cutter rate yield. So we want to put a point into rerouting for power generation, as well as a point into overcharge. Both of these things are going to boost our shield and our shield recharge rate, which is going to help us survive more in fights, but also recharge our stuff when we're trying to hand farm. So the only things that I would put into the planetologist tree as you're progressing would be a point into vehicle repair, as well as a point into vehicle mining. That 15% yield that you can get at level 2 is really helpful. So it starts to add up as you get more and more of these bonuses, especially if you unlock to level 2, the planetologist. So moving on to the Bene Gesserit tree, we have a point into Bindu Sprint, a point into Manipulate Instability. We have a point in Blade Damage to unlock Weirding Step, and that's all we did for this tree. On the other side over here, on Body Control for Bene Gesserit, we have a point into Recovery, we have a point into Self-Healing, and we have a point into Vitality. Now, we also will have Compel unlocked if we start out as a Bene Gesserit, so we can use Compel and have that on our bar as well, and put a point into Voice Training, but this is optional. If you haven't started out as a Bene Gesserit, then you can put something else on your bar. Personally, I like to use the Power 3. I'll usually have Knee Charge, I'll have Weirding Step, and then I'll have either Compel, or I'll have Shiga Wire Claw for more mobility while I'm in testing stations or running around the map. So this could be really helpful, as well as swapping on Bindu Sprint instead of Weirding Step if you're running around the map. So you have 3 mobility abilities right here to travel around quickly, but also take out your enemies if you need to. So moving on, let's look at Swordmaster. We have a point into blade damage. We're also going to put a point into knee charge, optimize hydration, crippling strike, and general conditioning. Now, if you have more points, obviously you can allocate more points into the passives or more points into your abilities, such as knee charge. As I mentioned before, we're going to have knee charge as one of our main abilities. You can swap on cripple strike as well if you're dealing with a lot of opponents. It's got a AoE sweep, and it can be really good as a stagger tool as well, besides knee charge. You can also alternatively put on knee charge and cripple strike, while also having Shigarwire Claw if you do not have the Bene Gesserit tree unlocked yet. So this is also another nice combo. It gives you a good combination of mobility as well as disabling your opponents. Now, if you don't have the Bene Gesserit tree unlocked for techniques, you can take off Manipulate Instability, and you can put on something else like either Battle Hardened, or if you want more damage, you can put on a point in, or not even damage, I should say. If you want more sustain, you can put a point into Disciplined Breathing. But in essence, that is your choices if you don't have Bene Gesserit unlocked quite yet. But if you don't have Blade Master unlocked, you can also put more points into the passives for the short blade if you're using a dagger. You can put points into quality of life things like sun tolerance, or you can go back and put points into suspensor efficiency or stuff like that. That's going to give you quality of life. So, and as I mentioned before, if we had more skill points, you obviously want to level up your abilities and your techniques more. So center of mass would be a priority. Shigarwire Claw, if you want mobility, would be a priority over here. And then, as I mentioned before, the marksman things, you would also level up if you're doing that build instead. And then over here, we want to obviously focus on the cutaway mining and the vehicle mining to maximize our mining yields to get more progression quickly and do less mining runs. It's going to save us a lot of time. But that is the level 30-ish scale build you want to use, with obviously the exceptions included if you don't have Bene Gesserit unlocked or Blade Master, for example. So just plan accordingly. But as I said, it's not rocket science as far as the build we have for the early game, but there definitely is some things you want to ignore. I mean, I would not put points into Suspensor Pad or things like Poison Capsule, or just abilities that are just so niche that unfortunately need a lot of love and a lot of buffs from Funcom to actually be pretty useful in the game. So, but let's move on and talk about a build that's going to be a little bit higher up. That's going to have more like 60 or 70 skill points with level 2 stuff unlocked. So we'll get right into that. Before we dive into the skills and techniques, I want to go over the armor and weapons loadout real quick. Now, obviously, this is not going to be a one-for-one as far as what you'll have in the progression stage, but I'm going to assume, like I said, you're between tier 3, tier 4, but typically when I'm running this build, I'm running a ranged weapon, like a shotgun, for example, as my switch, if I need to use that for engagements. I'm usually some sort of melee weapon. Usually you'll pick up a sword. So, right here we have a tier 3 sword, so you can use that. I always carry my vehicle backup tool, so I always have a spare bike, a tier 3, or a spare ornithopter if I'm on tier 4. Your cut array, depending on which tier you're on, is always nice to have on you. It's always nice to have a scanner for the quests. There's a lot of quests in this game that require you to have a scanner, so I would always have one on you. Having a leader John, having a blood sack, so you can get instant refill of your hydration level if you need to off of enemies with a extractor. If you can get the Mark IV, great, use that. And then I'm using full light armor for my setup, for a tier 3 setup. Now, obviously, if you're going to run more of the marksman build and your shield's going to be down a lot more when you're shooting, put on some heavy armor. But typically, just use the best light armor you can find for that better dash mitigation cost, because most of the time, it's going to come in handy more than it is just having heavy armor and taking more bullets. So, because your shield's going to be up and you can dash around. Now, suspensor belt. If you have the full suspensor belt, use that. Otherwise, use the leap suspensor belt. It's going to give us the best mobility until we get a full suspensor belt. And the same with your power pack. Just keep upgrading your power pack. Get a personal light when you can and unlock it. And then same for the shield. Keep getting upgrades there. But that's the main setup, guys, that I use when I'm running around the map. And I'll usually bring a welding torch, building tool if I'm going back to base. If I'm doing a no base run, I won't have this, of course, but this would be in a perfect world the setup you want to use in the mid game, and the early game for that matter. So, but let's move on to the skills and techniques. All right, so let's go over a build that's around the level 60 mark. Now it's going to be give or take a couple skill points, but essentially our goal for this build is to continue to maximize our techniques that we're using, or our abilities that we're using on a daily basis. So I would I put some more points in the Bene Gesserit versus the Trooper tree just to kind of keep it, sparing as far as the skill points. But if I leveled up a couple more times, my focus would be to put on another point in the Sugar Wire Claw and Center of Mass, for our techniques. I still ignore the Mentat tree unless you're going a marksman build. As I mentioned before, just flesh out marksman, headshot damage, and your respective weapon if you're doing a marksman build. But other than that, I ignore these trees until the very late game. Planetologist, we're maxing out again our cutaway mining and our vehicle mining over here to maximize our yields. We're going to keep putting points at the rerouting and overcharge. This is our priority. Everything else you can basically ignore. It's secondary until you get out to the deep desert. So for Bene Gesserit tree, I'm going to assume you unlocked it by now, hopefully by this point in the game if you're level 60 or 70. And you're going to start putting points into manipulate and stability. You're going to put more points into your passives. You're going to have your whole ability core set. So you're going to have compel, you're going to have weirding step, Bendu sprint. You can put another point in the Bendu sprint if you'd like, if you feel the need for it. And then for Swordmaster, we have a second point in knee charge. We want to keep maxing out our stamina over here for optimized hydration and general conditioning. This is really important. Optionally, you can start putting points into confidence and lunging strike. These are really helpful. It gives you a lot of damage mitigation when you're running full melee. So this will mitigate poison damage if you start leveling this up and start using reckless lunge. You can put points into long blade damage if you're running a sword or a rapier, and then obviously short blade damage over here in Bene Gesserit if you're running more of a dagger. But I'm focusing on trying to get my abilities and techniques up the highest. Passives are going to be secondary for your skill points. When you start to get the points, flesh those out. But having our core set of abilities we can swap in or swap out. So for example, if we're going full melee, we want to run knee charge with cripple strike and have Sugar Wire Claw for some mobility, and also for another stagger on the enemies for slow blading. We can swap in compel if we want there too. We can put in weirding step if we want more mobility on the enemies when we're in a camp. So there's a lot of variations we can do with these abilities and techniques, and ignoring the stuff that we're not really going to use or it's too niche. So each of these has a purpose that we're picking. If we want to go full mobility, we can put on Sugar Wire, Bendu Sprint, and Knee Charge. All three of these with the suspensor belt is going to make us fly around the map, whether it's in testing stations or in the overland area. So it's like wherever we are on the map in Haga, we can have some mobility for that. So techniques, I'm typically going to be sticking to the Power 3 over here, and maybe sometimes using disciplined breathing, but having suspensor dash I think is very useful, along with having center of mass and manipulate instability. This is going to give us maximal damage when we're facing against opponents in Haga Basin and progressing. So, but that's it for the leveling part. Let's talk about my thoughts about the overall experience. I wanted to throw this section in here for those that were a little bit confused on how the game works, but if we look at the whole Haga Basin map, we basically start in the starting zone. We make our way over to Anvil, and we're going to be spending a lot of time doing quests, running back and forth from Anvil into other POIs around this general area, right? And then eventually, if you're, a line of Atreides, you're going to get a lot of quests that, and also for Argo for that matter, but you're going to get a lot of quests that are going to take you back and forth into the Rift. So you're going to spend a lot of time in the Rift over here. Like, the Rift is going to be your best friend, and trying to climb that Rift every time is going to be a pain in the butt, but trust me, we've all done it, so you'll get used to it. But you're going to have to make a lot of trips to the Rift, establish a base somewhere either over by the Anvil, or you can start shifting your base over more north towards the Rift over here. So if you're doing a no base run like me, I just run back and forth between the Anvil and the Rift, and you just take that route over there. You go between the quicksand, and you kind of just follow those paths. Now, eventually, when you finish doing quests over here, you're going to want to eventually progress over more west, right? You're going to go over here to Pinnacle Station, and you're going to go start getting quests that are going to take you over in this region, especially the Swordmaster quests you can do over here. And then there's a couple of testing stations over here for Derek, for example, to do the Planetologist quests. So you're going to be hopping between these areas. And then all while you're doing that, you're going to want to be taking trips over to Arrakis. And you can also hop between the Ornithopter pilot at Pinnacle Station and Anvil if you need to go back over here. So you have mobility and options. And eventually you're going to want to establish yourself by the shield wall in this area, or like over on the western area over here. So you can farm aluminum, and you can also farm stuff over here in the Odom for your Ornithopters. So, but that's kind of the progression, guys, just to give you a rough idea of where you're going to be going location-wise for bases. and using these builds and being the most efficient with your time for progression. Because, like I said, I think I spent way more time than I wanted to in the Rift by going back and forth to these locations, like with the Anvil and the Rift over here. So, but once you get through all that and you get your Ornithopter, the map opens up a lot more. So you're going to be spending more time up north. But I hope that's helpful, guys. And that's all I got for today. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. And feel free to comment below what your favorite build is when you're trying to progress through the mid game. I'd love to hear also your thoughts about what I should put out next. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.